Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on semantic technologies and machine reasoning for better, faster, stronger data quality. My name is Elizabeth and I'm your moderator and host for today's webinar. Before I get started, I want to run through just a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, we are recording today's web seminar, so if you miss anything, you'll be able to catch it in the replay that I send to you first thing tomorrow morning. Along with the recording, I'll also be sending out a supplementary white paper called the 7 C's of Data Quality. You can also download it now on the right side of your screen under Files. Lastly, we do encourage questions, so please type your questions in the chat box as they come to you, and we'll get to as many of them as we can towards the end of the presentation. Now, before we begin, I just want to give you a quick introduction to today's presenter, Robert Stanley. Robert is one of the founders of IO Informatics, and after the company's recent merger with Melissa, Robert is now the Senior Director of Customer Projects for Melissa Informatics. Melissa Informatics combines Melissa's global intelligence and expertise in data quality with IO Informatics' long-standing expertise in semantic technologies and machine reasoning to support leaders in life sciences, biotechnology, pharmaceutical, clinical, and medical industries to meet the challenges in healthcare informatics, as well as drive clinical insight and discovery. Robert's graduate studies at University of Chicago focused on epistemologies and ontologies. We're really excited to have him here with us today. Thanks for being here, Robert. And
okay.
Turn it over
Sound
to you.
good?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks, Elizabeth. And I'll just say I appreciated that nice introduction. There may be a couple folks in this meeting who know what those terms epistemology and ontologies mean. I certainly hope so. But if you don't, you'll get a little introduction today. We're talking about some fairly advanced technology, specifically semantic technologies, which provide machine reasoning. And we're going to talk about how that can get you much more quickly to what we call hyper-normalized, very high-quality data that's prepared to connect to other data, interoperable and well managed in a potentially in a master data management environment, if that's what you're interested in. So we're going to be talking a fair bit about some fairly advanced technologies, but we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how that can make your life better around data. First, just to do a quick introduction to the team itself. The Melissa Informatics team has been working for over 15 years in the healthcare life science data space. We've got a fantastic group of advisors. Stanford University, we work quite a bit with their National Center for Biomedical Ontologies there. Nice customers you can see. And we've won several prestigious awards. So, you know, we're real business, been around. I'm fantastically happy to be working with Melissa. Example, a few of our customers here, generally ranging from pharma, small biotech, out all the way through clinics, points of care, hospitals. We really like to work with research clinics, biotech companies, pharma companies, and the like. So there's been a lot of hype around big data over the last couple of years, particularly for a company like Melissa Data. We've become very aware of a dirty little secret in the big data space, and that secret is dirty data. You know, that old saying, garbage in, garbage out, still is relevant even today, and in the big data space, it's particularly relevant. So we're here to solve those problems. Poor data quality can really cause big issues. We've had customers who have, you know, taken months every time they want to ask a single question of their data to pull that data together. You can't ask business questions without clean, well-connected data. You need to have all of the data together that's required to answer a question. You know, you may have customer information. You may have information about how a big group of people have responded to an ad campaign, but if those data sets can't connect, you can't tell which customers responded well to your ad campaign, you know, that sort of thing. You need to have all of the data together. It needs to be timely. And important to mention, you need to be able to maintain that data over time. This is practically the biggest problem actually with traditional data warehousing methods that are used to really clean big data sets. You can get a nice clean relational data warehouse, but then you may realize a week or a month later that there's a whole different set of data you wanted to add. That can be very difficult. Or you may realize there are some questions you wanted to ask that you hadn't thought about. Redefining the schema of that relational database to answer those questions can be very difficult. So, managing and extending integrations over time can be a big problem. You need interoperability, you need extensibility, that kind of thing. So we're addressing these sorts of business bottlenecks. We want to get your data connected more quickly. In order to be connected, that data needs to be clean. You need high quality data. When you have high quality, clean, what we call normalized data that is connected to the other data that's important, you can ask questions and get answers in seconds. We've got nice customers like AstraZeneca who have stated, for example, questions that used to take them 6 months to answer, they can now answer in seconds. This is the kind of time and cost saving outcome you need. So been at a pretty high level so far, just kind of giving you a sense about why we're around, the kind of problems we're trying to solve. Let's talk a little bit about this stuff that's called Semantic. I'll just mention this is a NoSQL type of environment. We're talking about a NoSQL database. It's a very particular type that allows for really advanced artificial intelligence, particularly machine reasoning that can be applied to reduce your time to get data clean and connected. So there's some core innovations here, and practically the real core innovation is this simple little concept. It's the lowly triple. It's 1, 2, 3 things: resource has value, or subject, predicate, object, actually considered to be the basic unit of meaning used by humans to communicate. So, Bob is giving a demo. That's a resource, Bob. The predicate is giving, and then the value hopefully is in the presentation and demo today. So this is a NoSQL environment. These databases are made up out of these triples, all connected. This sounds kind of esoteric, but the nice thing about this is it's a World Wide Web standard. So it's a global standard. It's an open standard. It was designed by the World Wide Web Consortium along with groups like MIT and Stanford University, actually working with my company over a decade to make sure that this is a open standard that can be used for advanced data integration. And then we've got some really advanced query language that's associated with that allows for reasoning. Again, all of this is a World Wide Web standard like HTML, but for data instead of for web pages. So this gives you clean linked data. When we talk about linked data, we talk about collections of these assertions called triples. When we do data harmonization using the sentient system, that's the software that Melissa Data provides, we keep provenance. In other words, if we make any transformation to the data, let's say we change the name acetaminophen to Tylenol in order to bring it into a preferred terminology, we'll keep the provenance. In other words, one time it was called acetaminophen and we made this change. That way you can be confident in the gold standard data that you end up with. We'll talk a little bit more about how these triples connect to form what we call ontologies and why this is useful for creating and applying knowledge. Just to go a little bit deeper, we have a linked data model. This allows you to handle any kind of concept you can think of. So we can work with virtually any type of data source. We can work with big text blocks. We can work with images, you name it. And we can connect these in virtually any way a person can think of. This is quite different from a semantic database in that we're connecting the data in a way that's human meaningful. We'll talk about what that means. But basically what we're doing is we're taking concepts in the background and we're connecting them in ways that allow us to ask questions. This is actually a query. Someone's looking for a gene that has associated proteins that are interacting with a certain strength. They want to look through the database to find those things. So these linked data networks are made up out of URIs. Each concept in the database has a globally unique uniform resource identifier. This is very similar to the URL concept with HTML. These come together to create what we call a triple store, which is a semantic database. Triple stores contain graphs. Those are linked data connected by lines, and you see pictures of those all the time in people's marketing materials, but we're a company that actually works with those sorts of linked databases and gets the benefit out of those. On the right, you see a little piece of what that looks like. So this is a very small example of linked data. You could also talk about an ontology, which is the organization of the linked data. So ontologies define all of the things in an area of interest. In other words, the classes, the concepts, the relationships in a domain of interest. So for example, I want to understand Parkinson's disease. I need to understand what the things are that are associated with Parkinson's disease and how they connect. There are a lot of different levels of formalism for how ontologies are defined, but that's really the way to think of an ontology. It's like a data model that connects linked data in a way that makes sense to you, that is human readable and usefully computer readable, so computers can use these meaningful ontologies to apply reasoning. So these linked databases build up from basic units of meaning. Let's say I have a patient who's visited my clinic, they took a medication, and they had an adverse event. They came in complaining of headaches, hot flushes, like high blood pressure. We don't know what happened. We want to understand how. By bringing in and connecting using the semantic technologies, public information, we can learn, get a hypothesis very quickly on what's happened. So we can learn by connecting, just linking like a friend to a social network, one piece of data to the next. This drug, rasagiline, inhibits monoamine oxidase. Monoamine oxidase regulates tyramine responses. And we could actually go further, and we could have a line that would show that tyramine response is associated with high blood pressure and some of those headaches and some of those other difficult examples. So by connecting in information about monoamine oxidase and tyramine, we're able to see that a patient who's taken rasagiline has a possible tyramine response for an adverse event, and then we can check a little bit further with that patient and see. But this is how these linked data networks connect meaning. So on the left here is data would be coming out of an electronic medical record system, and on the right is data that can be coming from published information like PubChem or Drug Bank about how these drugs work. I hope the relational database experts in the call today can see how this can really extend ways of modeling data. That this really is a much more human, understandable way of modeling data than thinking about creating tables with primary keys and foreign keys. That's how you connect. But this technology also will still work with relational databases. We can create table views onto this backend data, so you can still treat this like a relational database on the consumer side, but you have a lot more power here on the modeling side. Sparkle is something pretty exciting. It's a query language that allows to apply meaning. It queries these linked databases. Melissa Informatics has created a visual query tool that can make it very easy to write Sparkle and apply it, and we'll show you this in a little bit. Again, just to recap, this is a worldwide web standard. This is not some special proprietary secret thing that we've invented. However, it's an extremely advanced technology standard that few companies have developed around, and this really brings you forward in a number of different ways. Every single element of your data gains a global unique identifier. Every class and element is well connected in a way that allows you to create what we call knowledge networks. They're computable networks that you can apply reasoning to. And very usefully, these data links can handle diversity and change. You can just think of a social network if you'd like. You can block a friend. In other words, you can cut out all kinds of data that you don't like. You can add a friend, and when you add a friend, you can gain connections to all of their friends very easily. In the same way, you can remove parts of a linked data graph, or you can add parts of a linked data graph. You can create new connections. It's very flexible. This kind of technology has really been blowing up in terms of adoption. We stopped updating this graph in 2014 just because the window became full. But all of these are public data sources that are useful. Down here on the right side are all healthcare life science data sources. And if we will help you with your data quality and management issues using the Sentient software, all of these data sources become quite easy to connect to your internal data. So this is external data that can complement, we call it enrich your internal data. So we've still been fairly abstract, talking about how technologies work. We've also been talking about the kind of problems we're trying to solve and how we solve them. Let's give a real world example. So we work with a lot of data that can be quite poorly structured. In this example, you actually see data coming from a real world electronic medical record system, one of our customers. This is data coming out of an application. We can't tell you the exact EMR system. The EMR providers asked us to keep confidentiality on that. But you can see finding the data in the mess of application information, like what color the font is and how wide the font should be and that sort of thing, which also is coming out of the EMR. When you want a full dump to get everything in the EMR, it can be hard to get the right data. But our system will sniff through using resources like ontologies and lexicons that know this is called a drug. We've got a lexicon that has a lot of drug names. We've got information about those drugs connected to the ontology, so we know that these drugs are given in these milligram levels, so we can identify these as areas of interest in this data dump. We also will go through in the same EMR system medical notes, finding information that will complement and extend what we're being able to learn about a patient and the drugs they're taking. So in this exercise, we're really trying to get clear on what drug is a patient taking, how often is that patient taking the drug, and how much drug is the patient taking. We're looking in application data, we're looking in medical notes, and we're also looking in XML that's spit out. All of this data comes from one EMR system, and this is the kind of thing you'll see frequently. The real wild frontier of big data and healthcare life science can be pretty messy. This is actually the nicest example of pretty clean structured data that came out of the EMR system. So we're going to look at this content and get quite a bit of information out. Now, usefully, you'll notice here we see these long names: carbidopa, levodopa, levodopa, and entacapone. A quote dumb system, a regular traditional system, wouldn't know that this here is actually the same thing as Stalevo, but because we have ontologies with dictionaries in the back end, we can tell that and we can pull this out as well. So what we do is we first apply our system in the back end using workflow tools to connect to all of these data sources. We pull this data in, we find the things that look interesting, that are matching criteria that we're looking for, and then we can use ontologies and lexicons in order to normalize and connect this data. So over here we see Stalevo, some dose information. Over here on the left, we see carbidopa, levodopa, and entacapone, and some other time of day and dosing information. And then finally, from that third XML source, we get quite a bit more information here. We want to bring that information together so that we can confirm what the patient is really taking. So we're going to look for the common concepts across all those patients. One patient, 3 different sources, And we're connecting that by using the national drug file and the FDA structured product label lexicons that have all this different terminology that tells us carbidopa, levodopa, and entacapone has a trade name, Stalevo. So we're able to connect these different concepts using these common terminologies, bring that together. We can actually then run a query on that database, and we'll show you this in a little bit in a demo, and generate a report that's a unified report now. So now we have a report. The preferred label that the customer has requested is carbidopa, levodopa, and entacapone. I guess that's the most detailed and precise. We're keeping the synonyms that we used down here in the right in parentheses, just to show that we're confirming that these are the same thing. This is the preferred label. These are alternative labels. And then we have the other information that we've pulled from those other sources about that. So you can see we've got a nice report, unified information about these three data in a relatively well-normalized table. So this is a really nice outcome for the customer coming from what you can see was a pretty messy upstream data source. There's more we might talk about normalizing for the customer here, but this is getting to be a pretty useful report. That's the kind of outcome you want. Coming from different sources, but a unified report. Okay, we're starting to come into the home stretch now. We'll just talk briefly about innovations and benefits. I've mentioned this a little bit, but now we'll get a little bit more clear. Ontology-based machine reasoning, that's something you can also look up on the internet. That's something we provide. We also do provide more traditional machine learning as a part of our workflow, but the machine reasoning is the real deep innovation here. This set of technologies was purpose-built by W3C and others to reduce time and effort for data harmonization, interoperability, and global querying across connected data sets that can apply reasoning. Usefully, the data that's been harmonized using these methods we call hypernormalized, so this becomes quite easy to spit this data out in all kinds of different table formats for different relational uses. This is what the data looks like in the back end. We're actually going to show you this in a demo in a little bit, where this little picture, which I'm assuming is probably going to be a little confusing to you right now, actually will show examples of reasoning, we'll show examples of ontology-based data alignment, and we'll show examples of lexicon-based data alignment. We'll get there. The real point on this, you want to reduce the you want to reduce the risk, you want to reduce the time, you want to reduce the cost to get to useful data integration. You want to be able to drag this data into your system pretty quickly and start querying without having defined the schema before you even start. Sometimes you're going to find new data that you didn't even know was in those data sources. With relational databases, you need to spend a lot more time trying to get the schema definition right rather than actually going through the data and seeing what you can find and connecting it to your network. So with this system, you can get started quickly and start building a network and refining it as you go. A part of that, then, your data is really future-proofed. This is super important because you can modify, refine, transform that network as you go, add new data without even breaking applications that are connected to existing classes or concepts. You can really manage complexity and change moving forward. You can add new data easily. You can align with different standards easily, that sort of thing. It really matters. So you get immediate benefits for near-term use, and you get longer-term benefits for data management and for extensibility, that sort of thing. Take a look at the specific products. So we have a suite of products. You heard me mention Sentient early in the talk. This is what we're talking about. It's a Sentient suite of software for data harmonization, search, and master data management. We've got server technologies in the back, processing, pipeline, that sort of thing, automated data testing, and assignment of different data to classes, flagging outliers for data decisions. You know, some things maybe the system in its automated way can't be completely sure about. we get usually about 95 to 98% of the content, but that 2% you need an efficient way to handle. On the right are end user facing apps. The Knowledge Explorer we'll demo today. Web Query is also a nice app. It's just a web-based tool you can use to query data. If you go to Melissa Informatics, you can learn more about web query. And then we can also provide custom applications. We have something called Knowledge Hub. In Knowledge Hub, we've actually applied our own technology in order to go through a lot of those public data sets I was pointing to earlier, bring data in, curate it, connect it, make it useful for you. So we have a lot of information about concepts you see on the screen here: drugs, chemicals, proteins, genes, diseases. Just ask Melissa Data and you can learn more about this content. This can be useful for enriching your data with information that's known about it. A little bit more detail on that content. This is frequently changing as we update data sets. See a little web link down at the bottom. And one more page about Knowledge Hub. A lot of content that can be quite useful. Last but not least, we have a set of products. I like to call them the terms enators. They work with different healthcare life science terms. So our first Terminator product that we're releasing is called Druginator. This is just a web service you can go to online. We provide APIs. You can plug this right into your system. You can upload a drug to check and see if it's known, to verify what the preferred label would be, enrich it with additional information, that sort of thing. One thing we found with these technologies, when you're first starting working with Melissa Data Technologies, the costs are roughly comparable to the costs of relational database-oriented data quality projects. The difference, however, is we're building a lot of knowledge into the database that becomes useful downstream. So you have these linked databases with data connected according to their human readable and machine readable meaning, becomes much easier to work with moving forward. You need to add new data. You need to align the data with a different set of standards for a different customer. You need to connect new data. That sort of thing can go much quicker. So cost tends to go down usually by year 3 or so. The cost of data management in your company will be a fraction of the cost of competing companies. We have a lot of nice use cases. Now, I'm not going to take too much time on these use cases today. This is something I'd welcome people to follow up on. This is just to give you a sense of what we do. Working with AstraZeneca, connecting about 200 different clinical trials studies, decades of information coming from many different hospitals, very complex. Here's just a quick example showing connecting on the left. Procedures. These can be, this can also include things like working with ICD codes, HL7 codes, MESH, SNOMED, all these kind of surgical example procedure codes, connected on the right to demographic information through a couple of common IDs, and sort of how this looks in the database when we're doing those connections. Another example, helping a customer find out what combinations of genes and proteins are associated with medical outcomes. We can really help you connect the data you need, apply some advanced querying and visualization to identify, for example, combinations of biomarkers that are decisive for outcomes you need. If you need to find a patient who's a likely responder to a drug, this is a great way to do that. You need to find a patient who's a candidate for a clinical trial. This sort of technology can help you do that, or just find those sets of variables that make the difference, that identify that patient. Helping FDA find combinations of biomarkers that are common across animals. This was really neat. By doing this, FDA is able to use cell lines in petri dishes to identify a pathology risk for like a dog or a horse or a pig, rather than actually doing the test on the animal themselves. It really saves a lot of money, and also if you care about that, it really improves the ethical conditions. It requires less testing on animals. At this point, I think the concepts should be getting pretty clear. By helping this customer connect genes and metabolic data with outcome data, we're able to help them find out, actually this is pretty interesting, whether or not the patient was exposed to maybe benzene on the job, or whether or not perhaps they've been drinking a lot of alcohol on weekends, what's causing that liver toxicity. With this application, the customer can tell that. Okay, just flip through these. Don't think we need to talk to all of these different examples, but we're happy to, if you see anything that strikes your fancy, follow up and ask. All right, with that, we're going to go into a little demo. This is a little cute picture here on the left showing our link data. You know, this is how it works. Bob is giving a demo. We're going to get into that now. Let's close this down. Okay, you should see my Knowledge Explorer product up on the screen here. This is one of the core technologies in the Sentient Suite. In a way, this is the real workhorse where a lot of that data harmonization gets done. This is a power tool for data quality. Let's show you how it works. I'm going to actually do two quick demos today. First, I'm going to do a simple, really straightforward how we create linked data and how we can connect to data sets demo using some really familiar kind of customer data. Then we're going to go into a more advanced demo that shows us working with reasoning and ontologies and lexicons. So to start, I'm just going to bring in a little data. This is just regular data. This could be a spreadsheet. This could be XML. This could be delimited text like CSV. This is some content from Melissa data that's been, you'll see some customer names. This has all been permitted to use. I'm going to show you why and how someone from inside Melissa data would like to connect our customer information with an ad campaign we did. So we've got a really broad ad campaign going to a lot of folks, including people who aren't customers, but then we've also got our own customer data. We want to see who from the ad campaign responded with interest that was also a customer. So in order to do that, we've got to connect the business data to the response data, and I'm going to show you how we do that. So I just picked that business data. There are, I think there's, I'm trying to remember that. And we also get sample data from the first row. There's a lot we can do to set imports if there are spreadsheets with the multiple columns and that sort of thing, but we don't need to do that today. I'm just giving you a quick example. So we want to see what's in the data before we map it. Over here on the right, you see subject, predicate, object. You may remember those are those units of meaning in a semantic database. Triples. We're going to create triples. I just said generate template. We created a template for this database with a bunch of triples like business name, has address, address. We'll show you what this means. This is what it looks like in the spreadsheet here, I mean in the visual image here. There are a few funny things right off the bat. You can see just looking at this, and this is what the data modeler does, or the knowledge engineer does using this tool. Okay, the institute has gender. I don't think that the institute is a female. The institute has a first name, Laura. I don't think so. Okay, so we're finding some issues with this really dumb first push data model we created, but I can see that the institution has a key executive named Laura, so that's kind of interesting. And I can also see that the business has an address. So now I'm going to turn this from just a really super simple, what we call hub and spoke data model, into what's going to be a real business ontology, a little bit of a business ontology. So I'm going to take this concept of address. We can do a lot of detailed work here, but the most important thing is we have an address. And I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it over here. So we'll say the business has an address, and the address now has a city. Okay, so the address has a city. The address has a state. Address has a zip code. You know what? I think I'm going to say the zip code has a zip 4 connected to it. And I remember we had those other issues with key executive. So the business has a key executive, and the key executive has a gender, and the key executive has a first name and a last name. I think you get the idea. Let's see what we've done over here. Okay, nice. So we've got now something that's just beginning to look a little bit like what we might call a real, little bit of a business ontology. We can see the business has an address, it has a city, it has a state, it has a zip code. This could be used to generate a table or an output with this unified address here. So we've kind of got something now. I think this is good enough for the demo. Let's bring this in. Good enough for the demo, but maybe I don't really want to save that mapper to reuse. It's you know, I'd probably make it a little bit more perfect. So I'm not going to save it to reuse it, but we can reuse it if we want to. Just importing this in. For this little demo, I'm working in memory. You can work on maybe up to several billion assertions just in memory on a laptop. If you've got a big screaming machine with big memory, you can do a lot in memory. We also will work in database. I'm going to show you that in a second. So we brought all this information in. That's you know, kind of nice so far. We can actually do a lot here to modify this class tree and make it into a pretty class tree with parents and children, that sort of thing, but we don't need to do that today. I'm just going to pull this business into my working window. This is the navigation window now where I can really explore the data set. I'm going to see what's connected. Okay, so we've got a lot of nice stuff connected to that business. These are all those things that we had in that mapping tool, if you remember. I'm going to pull the address into the window. Okay, there's that stuff that we saw. Not a lot, not very exciting, but you know, we've got it in the system. Now this is okay here, but I can't answer my business questions. I can't ask what customers also responded to that business campaign unless I bring in the ad campaign data. So let's bring in the ad campaign data. This is that response data. I'm going to bring it in. This is the response ID here. I'm going to set that as the central element this time. Now the cool thing here is we've got some common concepts. So we've got address here, right? There was address in the other data set, so we can use address as a common concept. Now personally, I like the Melissa data address better than the address that came from the ad campaign, because I know Melissa data does a good job with data quality, so I'm going to use this Melissa data address as the address of record. And I'm going to assign this to the address predicate, which is the concept that the address is attached to that was already existing in the database from before, and we're going to see that do something kind of neat and magical. I'm going to import this data. We haven't done anything special. We're just going to use that old data model. I'm going to go ahead and import this. And this is a slightly bigger data set. This was going to everyone Melissa data knows, so this is a bigger data set. This is now lining up address from the original data set to the address in the new data set. Okay, that's come in. And it looks like we had about 375,000 assertions. Now we've got almost 1.5 million assertions in the database, so it's getting to be a fairly sizable data set. Let's see if there's anything new on our address link. What do you know? This is kind of interesting. These numbers on the left actually are the response IDs, which were the main subject, if you remember, the center of that other network. I'm going to bring one of these in here, see what we can do with it. So this is now connected from the old data set to this new data set. It was that easy. And oh, we got all kinds of great stuff in here. So now I can see that Robert Wallace is there. He has an email address. Looks like, yep. He's got a couple of other bits of information, but this all looks like the same information that was from the other data set. And besides, this is what I really cared about. Let's just lay this out a little better. Okay, so just by connecting these two data sets, we're able to see that Robert Wallace was someone from Access to Legal Services who responded with interest to an ad campaign. Just by memory, I will just note that Robert Wallace is a different person than Laura Montoya, who's the key executive, and there were 3 people apparently who responded. We could have brought in 3 of these MD address responses. We had 3 responses, but we'll just bring in 1. Now what I want to do is I want to create a query. If you remember the beginning, the thing that I really want to do here is I want to find out all of the Melissa data customers who responded to the ad campaign, because those are the likely responders to us. We want to go back and ask them, give them more information. I'm going to make all these concepts variables. We could do more here. We could put in some specific bit of a name or something like that. But at this point, I want everyone in the database who meets this pattern. So this is a nice pattern-based query. It's actually generating the sparkle in the background. Here's the sparkle, which is identical to this query. I'm going to run this query. We put a limit of 50. I'm going to make it a limit 125. Let's just see what we get. Okay, so it looks like we've definitely got plenty of results. You can see now we've got a lovely list. These are all customers of Melissa Data who responded with interest to an ad campaign and their email address. In order to do that, we had to connect those 2 data sets, and it was that easy. So for this demo, I've just shown you how we create linked data from traditional data. There are scale-up ways we do that in an automated manner, but this is a demo. I'm doing it manually so you can see it. We'll save those mappers in the backend if we want to, do this in an automated way. But by doing that, we're able to connect those 2 data sets and get results from a query that queried across them both. One quick little demo there. That was running in memory, but now I'm just going to clear this graph and I'm going to do another demo in the database. Now go ahead and clear that out. We can work with different databases. I'm going to connect to the Virtuoso database. Now this is a much more complex looking graph here. This is rather complex for a reason. I'm going to show you a few things. We're going to show a very simple example of reasoning that's just going to look for a pattern in the data resource and then make a change. It's called reasoning and entailment, basically looking for a pattern and then making a change based on that pattern. We're also going to show how we can bring in an ontology to align concepts and relationships. And then finally, we're going to show you how we can use a lexicon. You can think of that as a thesaurus in order to make sure we're getting our terms normalized terms, so all the data quality will be clear. So let's just have an empty graph. Just to start, we've got 2 studies we want to integrate. We've got 2 studies associated with gene expression. You'd think this would be easy. They're both coming from the same site. They're coming from a group called Gene Expression Omnibus. Similar structures. A study has a sample has results, title. We can already see an error though, gene expression. Looks like a spelling error, and I'll tell you we're going to find lots of errors in this data, and we usually do. If your data is perfectly cleaned, if it's normal, if it's easy to connect to other data, you don't need to work with us. If your data may have diversity, if it needs to be normalized, connected to other data, you want to work with us. So we've got some diversity here, but let's get a little bit more detail about what that really means. Let's show properties. What I just did was I dragged in what we call a layout file. It's basically a saved Sparkle query that calls content from the database and brings it up onto the screen. It's just useful for us for the demo. It's also quite useful for people who are working with the system. You want to save these layouts so you can get back to them. You can see a few things that are problems right now. This underlying database has got an odd structure. All these different things have the same, they're all members of the same class. It's this weird class, property sample characteristics underscore CH1. Here you've got disease, Alzheimer's disease. Here you've got gender female. So all these different things are kind of defined under the same concept. That's not useful. Plus, what's in the cell you've got a string on the left, you've got some kind of divider in the middle, a colon, a space, and then you've got a string on the right. This is your knowledge engineer is going to be looking at this. The first thing they're going to say is, you know what, let's clean up the structure of this database. This is not useful. Nobody wants to query for gender colon F. You want to query for female, right, in the database. You want to query for Alzheimer's disease under the disease class. This is just a mess. So we're going to bring in a little bit of reasoning, and we're going to apply reasoning. What we're going to do is a real simple example, just to keep it simple for everybody here today. We're going to look through the database for a pattern. When we see a concept that has a string, this separator, and another string under the predicate property sample characteristics CH1, we're going to make a transformation. And I'll show you what we're going to do. So we're going to apply reasoning with entailment. We just applied a little of entailment. We keep provenance on that, so we keep the history of what's done. That can be in a separate database. It's your QC database, but we keep a track of all the entailment, all the sparkle that's applied. I just moused over this. This is an example of what that little simple reasoning query looks like. Basically what we've done is we've gone all through the database, and wherever we see the things that look like this pattern, we've changed it to something that looks like this pattern instead. So now you have patient has disease Alzheimer's. Patient has gender female. Before you had, has sample characteristic CH1F, right? That's not so useful. Now you've got something that's much more useful. So this kind of stuff is no longer going to be needed. We're going to pull that out. We have this useful structure instead. So this is application of reasoning, just structuring the database. But we've got other problems. Okay, fine. Now we've got has gender male, but here on the other side, what do you know? It's completely different. We've got has sex, or this has gender M, here on the right has sex male. So you still can really query across these two databases, get common results. If you were looking for something in a class called gender and you're searching for male, if you're searching for a partial search, maybe you'd get all the females, or you wouldn't actually get anything because you're looking for gender and there's nothing called gender over in this database, right? So let's take care of that. Let's clean all this FM, male, female, gender, sex stuff up. We're going to do that by bringing in the National Cancer Institute thesaurus, which has been placed into an ontology concept, this NCIT ontology, into the system. The NCIT ontology, which we just pulled a tiny bit of here, it knows someone at National Cancer Institute's thought a lot about sex and gender and what the preferred label would be in a database, and we're using that. So what we found is preferred label is male. If you see the alternate label gender M, that's okay. That's a real thing. It's defined by National Cancer Institute as something that is meaningful, but whenever we see it, we're going to call it preferred label male. We're going to call it preferred label sex. So instead of gender M, we're going to have sex male in this database to query on. Hope that's making sense. Basically, we just brought in a little ontology that understands how we want to treat sex and gender for the purposes of this study, and that's taking care of that problem for us. Last but not least, all kinds of ways of describing diseases, all kinds of ways of describing tumors. This is not the preferred label for us or to be blunt, also for FDA. They don't prefer lymph node as one word, all lowercase. They prefer lymph node one word capital like this. So we applied also, last but not least, our lexicon, which has all these different term examples for lymph node. We do a little bit of text mining, kind of tiny part of our machine learning and natural language processing capabilities. We find, hey, there's a pretty darn close fit between lymph node and our lexicon entry for lymph node. 0.1 is close enough that we call that a match. We would automatically assign this preferred label to that term in the database. If we have a match that's maybe 0.3, not so close, that's the kind of match we might flag for data decision, someone to say, yeah, that really meant lymph node. Okay, I covered a lot of ground, I think. This was a kind of a deep dive demo for folks who are a little bit more interested in advanced methods, but what you've just gotten a little taste of is how the system can apply machine reasoning to harmonize, in this example, a little bit of actual kind of underlying database structure, how we can apply ontologies to clean up the relationships and terms in the database, normalize those to a preferred term instead of relationships, and finally how we've applied lexicon to make sure that all of our data quality is up to par. We've got gold standard terms for all of our main terms. So with these two demos that we've given, we've moved all the way from a simple example of just creating linked data, which you can see can be quite efficient for connecting a couple of data sets on common concepts, to really handling the tough stuff, you know, applying reasoning, ontologies, and lexicons to work with some complex data that really needs, to be blunt, artificial intelligence to reduce the time and cost to get you to clean data that's future-proofed and answers your business questions. I think that's what I've got for demos today, Elizabeth.
That was great. That was really informative, Robert. And we have a ton of questions coming in. We're running a little bit short on time, but I did want to get to just a couple maybe of our audience's questions, and then we can maybe reach out to the rest of them on off-air time. But if you have just a couple more minutes, our first question is, how can you provide content for our internal applications, or how can this provide content for our internal applications?
Right. Yeah, that's a really nice question, and we'll kind of get that because the semantic database seems a little bit esoteric. So you sounds like you want to program probably to that, and there are a few things that we can provide. They're quite nice and make things real easy for you. One, Melissa Data has constructed a suite of APIs. So Melissa Informatics is providing content for those APIs. So I mentioned that Druginator concept. So one thing you can do is just attach your own system to our APIs if that's something you'd like. So, you know, let's say you just want to have something that cleans up your drug terms, something that cleans up your disease terms, or something that converts your terms to a preferred label and attaches additional information to terms. You can ask us about our APIs. Something else that this system can do quite nicely, I mentioned the hyper-normalized concept. Because this data is really richly connected, it becomes quite easy for us to surface tables. So if you'd like to write your applications to relational database tables, we can provide index tables super fast, well-performing. Right to tables, that's another way of doing things. So last but not least, we do also have an underlying workflow engine that in theory could also take content from applications, put it through some transformations using our technology, and put it back if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. There's a few ideas there. Yep.
Good. Great. Next question, how do we work with this sort of database? Can we use it for analytics?
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of similar, but a little different to the previous question. You know, one way you can work with this database I've mentioned. We're quite good at this. If you'd like to do this with consulting, or you could probably do this yourself, we can surface different views from the database for your analytical applications. That's a straightforward concept. You know, work with R, SAS, SaaS, or others like that. SAS, not software as a service, but the SAS statistical application, you know, that sort of thing. We can give you the views you need, and we're doing that with customers. Also, you can do some interesting analysis with the tool itself, particularly if you want to find things like intersection of groups. You look for things that are showing common behavior across different multiple data sources, you know, that sort of thing. So you can do pattern-based searching, find things that are common to different data sources, things like that, using this system with the UI you're looking at right here. A couple ideas there.
Actually, to speak to that, we do have a question about the querying tool. Does it support numeric values or ranges?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I'm tempted to open it up in demo, but we probably don't have time. The short answer is absolutely. Yes, it does. In fact, we can do ranges on numeric values, inclusion, exclusion, optionals, you know, all those nice things you need. The visual tool actually provides a lot of that, and then I think I splashed it up real quickly. Once you get familiar with Sparkle by using the visual tool or by learning about it yourself, you can also just modify the Sparkle. So yes, to all of the above.
Okay, wonderful.
Yep.
I don't
Yep.
know if it's easily accessible to you, Robert, but if you want to throw your contact information up while I close out the webinar, then maybe anyone else who has questions could reach out to you personally or
Yeah. Yeah. Let me
call
do that. There
me.
we go. You guys see my screen here?
Right. Yep, we could see
Yep.
it. Yep, perfect.
Fantastic.
So I just wanted to thank everyone for attending the webinar today, and thank you again, Robert. That was a wonderful presentation. And as I mentioned earlier on, we will send out the recording first thing tomorrow. If you have any questions, please feel free to email Robert directly, or we will definitely be reaching out to any of the questions that you submitted during this presentation and answering those for you offline. So hope you all have a beautiful day, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, everybody. Bye.